So, hello once again, my dear students. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is that you are watching this video. I am uploading this video as additional or supplementary material to our module entitled 14 Learning-Centered Principles of Teaching. I have already uploaded that module into our GC. I hope that you have already downloaded it. I hope that you have already read and studied it. This lecture video, as already mentioned, is an additional or supplementary material to that video. Okay. So for this particular module, our objectives are as follows. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to do the following. Discuss the different learner-centered principles of teaching. Explain how its principle can be realized or applied in the classroom, and give examples of instances in which these principles are demonstrated in the classroom. Okay. So as already mentioned, our lecture video today will focus on the 14 learner-centered principles of teaching. Let us first understand what is meant by by learner-centered teaching. Ano ba yan? What is this all about? Pag sinabing learner-centered teaching, what is it all about? Well, first of all, we often say in the field of education that the learner is the most important element or component in the educative process. We often say that the learner is the most important variable in the educative process, in education. The whole educational system exists for one purpose only: the development of the learner's full potentials as a human being. Therefore, all the different aspects of education should be geared towards that end. All the machineries, kumbaga, no? All the elements of education should be geared towards that purpose, that goal, that objective of developing to the fullest potential every learner. So to achieve that, we have what we call a learner-centered curriculum, meaning the curriculum should be based and tailored to the interests and needs of the learner. The whole structure of education should be geared towards the same objective, the holistic development of the learner. That is what we call the learner-centered curriculum or the learner-centered education. Administration, which is another component or aspect of education, should be geared towards that same purpose, the holistic development of all the learner's potentials as a human being. That is why schools strive to provide learners with the best learning environment they can afford. The best buildings, the best structures, the best campus, the best libraries, the best laboratories, the best equipment that the school can afford. Teachers strive, meaning they do their level best to design the most effective learning experiences, learning activities for the learners. Our educational managers always strive to come up with the best approaches to teaching. Why? Because of our because of our desire to develop the learner's full potentials as a human being. So you will notice that in all of those endeavors, the learner is the primary consideration. Will this be good for the learner? Will this lead to effective and meaningful learning? If I were a principal, that will be my first question. Will this be? Itong decision ko bang gagawin? Will this be beneficial to the learner? Kung ako ay teacher, that is also my first question. Ito bang gagawing learning activities ko ngayon will be beneficial to my students, to my pupils? Is this the best way of teaching them? Ito mga materials, mga visual aids na gagamitin ko, are these the best materials available to me? Itong pagkaka-structure ng aking classroom, ito ba ang pinaka-the best na makakaya ko? So that my learners will enjoy staying in my classroom, so that they will be motivated to participate in our class activities. If the answer is yes, if the answer to those questions, if those answers to your questions to yourself is yes, then you are approaching teaching. Your approach to teaching is learner-centered, meaning your teaching is focused, geared towards the development of the learner. Everything you do is for the benefit of the learner. Yan ang tinatawag nating learner-centered teaching. Teaching wherein the most important consideration, the foremost consideration, the most important element is the learner. When choosing a topic, the first question is this appropriate for my learner? Is this in line with their needs? Is this in line with their interest? Is this in line with their learning style? Is this in line with their developmental stage? See, the first question is, how does this relate to the learner? Kaya kasi tinawag na learner-centered. The whole process of teaching is focused towards the learner. Kumbaga, the learner determines everything. The learner determines what is to be taught. The learner determines how he or she is to be taught. And the learner determines what the teachers will use in teaching him or her. Learner-centered. Kasi nung una class, long time ago, Education was not learner-centered. It was subject-centered. If I were a teacher during that time, my approach would be like this. Okay, I have a specific topic which I want to teach to this particular class. This is the topic. This is the subject matter. So, I prepare for class without regard, meaning without taking into consideration, without thinking of my pupils, without thinking about my students. All I have in mind is that I have this topic, I have this lesson, and you have to learn this in whatever way I choose. I do not care. I don't give a damn whether this is within your interest. I don't care whether this is in line with your needs. I don't care whether this is in line or consistent with your developmental stage. Wala akong pakialam. Basta't itong mga scientific names na ito lahat, which is our lesson for today, dapat na-memorize ninyo ito. Mga kolokoy kayo. I don't care whether you are interested or not. I don't care whether this is within your experience or not. Basta't ito ang lesson ko. Kailangan na-memorize ninyo ito. So you see, the focus is on the subject matter. The learner is there to receive it. The learner is there to absorb it without regard, without taking into consideration his needs, his interests, his developmental states, and other factors or influences that shape or affect learning. Wala akong pakialam sa inyo. Basta itong lesson natin, kailangan ma-absorb na ito lahat. So you see, that is subject-centered. We are no longer practicing that. At present, what we are practicing, what we are doing, and right now, what we are trying to learn as future teachers is how to do, how to perform, how to effect, how to carry out learner-centered teaching. Meaning in this subject, we are trying to learn how to teach using this approach, the learner-centered approach, teaching in which the most important element, teaching in which the most important consideration is the learner. That is what we call learner-centered teaching. Okay, so in this particular topic, 14 learner-centered principles of teaching. So we're going to take this up one by one, of course. Yung 14 na yan. 14 principles which were given to us by the American Psychological Association. And as you can see in our slide, all of these psychological principles all pertain to the learner and the learning process. Remember, class, these are principles. These are not just opinions. These are not just ideas taken from somebody, from anybody. Hindi ito mga ideas na dinampot lang sa kanto-kanto. These are psychological principles. Meaning, they have been studied, they have been researched by psychologists, by educationists, by educators, by teachers, and they have been established to be true. That is why they are called principles. Meaning we can rely on these principles. We can be very sure that they are true. We can believe them. We can be very confident that they work, that they are true. Totoo sila. Yeah. So pag sinabing principles, these are things that have been proven to be true And we can think of these principles as our guide, as teachers, no, in practicing learner-centered, excuse me, learner-centered teaching. All of these psychological principles pertain to or refer to the learner and the learning process. Bakit naman puros tungkol sa learner? Bakit naman puros tungkol sa learning process? Simply because, as we have just discussed in the previous slide, the learner is the most important element, the most important variable, the most important consideration, the most important factor in the educative process. And the learning process is in line with this. In order for the learner to learn, teachers should understand how the learning process occurs. Teachers should understand how to effect, meaning how to make happen, how to make occur an effective and meaningful learning. And that is why we are going to discuss these principles, which in effect summarizes all those principles, all those theories that we have discussed in the previous modules and previous lecture videos. Kumbaga, class A, ito yung kanyang pinaka-synthesis of all that we have learned, the synthesis of all that we have discussed in this subject from module 1 up to the last, this one. Siyang parang pinaka-summary, parang pinaka-synthesis nga, no? Meaning we combine into principles what we have previously learned. Yung mga theories, no? Parang sinasummarize natin sila dito. Okay. Bakit naman importante ito sa atin? To understand the learner and the learning process. Well, as future teachers, and as already mentioned before, in this subject, our purpose is to become effective teachers. That's our purpose, to become learner-centered teachers. Yeah. And knowing our learner is one of the first steps in becoming an effective teacher. Diba sabi natin noon, if you are a carpenter, what do? You try to know everything you can about wood, different kinds of wood, how they what do you call this? The kind of grains they have, kung sila'y matigas pakuan, things like those, everything about wood. If you're a mason, yun bang kantero, yung nagmamason, nagpapalitada, gumagawa ng pader na simento, gano'n. What do? You try to know everything about cement or concrete. If you are a fisherman, you try to know everything you can about fishes and their behavior. If you are a farmer, you try to know everything about whatever it is that you farm. Kung payay, you try to know everything you can about rice. If you are planting corn, then you try to know everything you can about corn. Why? Because that is what you deal with. That's what you plant. Ganon din yung mga karpentero, kantero, mga fishermen. They want to know about wood, cement, and fish because that is what they deal with in their professions. So in our profession as teachers, We deal with children. We deal with learners. We are with them every day of our lives as teachers. From Monday to Friday, sometimes even Saturdays, we meet them. So, everything we do is based on the learner. So, knowing the nature, knowing the characteristics, knowing the behavior of the learner will enable us to design instructional activities and experiences for them that is suited to, that is tailored to their nature, their needs, their abilities, their interests, so that our teaching, our approach to teaching becomes, learner-centered. See? Knowing the nature of the learner is one of the first steps in becoming an effective teacher. All right. The 14 principles are divided into those referring to cognitive and metacognitive, motivational and affective, developmental and social, and individual differences. Yan. Meron tayong, we have 14 principles, but these 14 principles are grouped together into 4 categories. Yan. So, yung 14, in the cognitive and metacognitive, there are 6, I think, no? Madadaanan naman natin mamaya. Then motivational and affective, iba-iba sila, may 3, may 2. Yun. So, the 14 principles are divided or grouped into the following categories. Cognitive and metacognitive principles, motivational and affective principles or factors, developmental and social, and then individual differences. All right. So, under the cognitive and metacognitive factors, we have, ito ngayon yung mga principles. First, nature of the learning process. So this principle falls under the category of cognitive and metacognitive factors. Yan ang ibig kong sabihin kanina, no, sa previous slide. Also, another principle under the cognitive and metacognitive factors, goals of the learning process, construction of knowledge, strategic thinking, thinking about thinking, and context of learning. These are the 6 principles of learner-centered teaching under the cognitive and metacognitive factors under the category of cognitive and metacognitive factors. Ang susunod na category, no, the next category is the motivational and affective factors. Under this category, we have the following principles. Motivational and affective influences on learning, intrinsic motivation to learning, and effects of motivation on effort. Under the developmental and social factors, we have the following principles. Developmental influences on learning, social influences on learning. Under the individual differences factors, which is the 4th and last category, we have the following. Individual differences in learning, learning and diversity, and standards and assessment. So, let us talk about the different principles under the first category, the cognitive and metacognitive factors. The first principle is the nature of the learning process. As you have probably seen and learned and realized, no, in our previous modules and previous discussions, learning is a complex process. Doon pa lang sa information processing, komplikado na. We can already see that learning is a complex process. Absorbing, internalizing, and retaining in one's long-term memory a bit of information or a bit of experience or a bit of knowledge is a complex process. However, even if it is a complex process, we can still affect learning. Ibig sabihin, we can still make learning happen. We can still make learning occur among our learners if we know how to do it. Even if the subject matter, even if the content, even if the lesson is complex. Content, by the way, refers to all lessons, all topics. No? Lahat ng pinag-aaralan sa eskwelahan, content ang tawag dyan. Lesson sa mathematics, content. Lesson sa English, lahat ng topics sa science, lahat ng topics sa social studies. Collectively, they are called content. Even the learning of complex subject matter can become effective if it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. Let us start our discussion from the word or with the word hindi international, rakalaxator. Intentional. Yan. All right. Intentional. Magloko nun. Intentional. Yeah. Well, sabi nga dito, learning becomes effective, no? Even if the topic, lesson, or whatever it is that is to be learned, kahit siya ay komplikado, effective and meaningful learning can still occur or happen if it is intentional. From the word intention, meaning there is a specific purpose. Kaya nga tayo gumagawa ng objectives so that our activities in the classroom will be focused or will be directed towards a specific end. It will be directed or focused towards a specific objective. The teacher knows exactly what he wants the learner to be able to do, know, or learn after the lesson. Intentional. A teacher does not simply get inside the classroom and teach and discuss for 2 hours without any specific purpose in mind. So he simply talks whatever comes into his mind. He talks about mathematics. After a while, he notices that it is going to rain, so he talks about the weather. After a while, his right hand hurts, so he talks about the human body. After a while, the teacher sees his or her friend walking outside. He talks about human relationships. He talks about how he and his friends went to a movie and watched a terrible movie. And then he relates or tells the story of the entire movie. Wala pong gano. The whole class, the whole period is devoted to a single topic all the activities, all the visual aids, all the teaching materials were designed and prepared and used to enhance learning that specific lesson. There is a specific purpose, there is a specific objective. That is also the reason why we inform our students of our instructional objectives. You still remember our discussion regarding Gagne's events of teaching? 9 events of instruction according to Gagne. One of those instructions, number 2, inform the learner of the objectives. Why? So that they will know what to expect, what to do inside the class within this period. They will already have an idea of what is going to be taken up and how that particular class on that period will go. Para sila mismo magkaroon ng focus din so that they themselves, the learners, they themselves will also have a specific direction in their mind with regards to their learning. In so doing, they can participate actively in the class and they can construct meaning. Meaning they will learn. They will be able to get new information, get new knowledge, and then integrate all of this into their prior knowledge. Integrate all of these things into their prior stack of knowledge. So they will be able to revise their schema. They will be able to integrate the new knowledge into the old. Therefore, revising their schema, they're revising their interpretation of the world based on the new information. See, that's learning. It should be intentional. Wala namang learners na matututo kung buhaghag ang pagkakaturo. Wala kang direksyon kung ano-anong pinag-uusapan sa klase nung ginagawa. Diba? Example tayo. Although masakit ito aminin, pero may mga teachers pong gumagawa ng ganito, ha? When you become teachers, do not do this. Okay, class. Good morning. Good morning, sir. Ano nga ang topic natin ngayon, Boknoy? Sir, ang binigay mong assignment is about say, electricity. Yeah, I remember now. Okay. Alam niyo, class, nung ako'y binata pa, naku, ang dami kong naging girlfriends. Oo, talaga, hindi ako nagbibiro. Siguro mga 27 class. So nag-umpisa siyang magkwento about his life, about his childhood. Nagtuna agad itong pag-anak sa Ida. Ngari ako na ko sa hospital ka to, class. Magkusog kag bagyo. Oo. Hirapan si nanay. Dumating sa kanyang elementary days. Nung elementary ko, class, ako magaling sa mathematics. I was a favorite of my teachers. Galing ako. Sa high school, doon ako nag-umpisang manligaw, class. Ang una kong niligawan ay si Esperanza. Ang cute niya, class, ganda niya. Hanggang mag-college na ako niya, dami kong naging girlfriends eh. 29 eh. Sir, sabi mo kanina 27. Ay, sorry. 27 lang. So yun 27 lang. And then he continues telling his story about his life. And then he go, ting. Sir, time na. Ganun ba? Okay. Class dismissed. Goodbye, class. See you next meeting. Ano ang natutuhan ng mga bata about electricity? Ay di wala. Walang focus, walang direction. Kasi walang specific intention yung teacher. Wala siyang plano kung anong gagawin on that particular period. That is not a learner-centered approach to teaching. Pwede magkwento paminsan-minsan if it is related to the lesson. And just in passing, huwag namang ubusin yung 1.5 hours. Puro buhay ng teacher ang kinuwento. Puro siyang bida. Puro siyang magaling. Okay, so that's the learning process. First, it should be intentional. See, that is the most important thing to remember here. Siguro another thing to remember here is that because they will construct knowledge, they will construct meaning. When we say construct, it implies that the learner will make something from something else. They will build something. They will create something. Ano yung i-create nila sa sarili nila? What will they create in their mind? Ano? Di ba they are trying to learn? When we are learning, what do we build in our mind? Di ba po? Knowledge. So that knowledge will be constructed, will be created by the learner in his mind by himself. So what do? We refrain from spoon feeding. We refrain from, meaning we do not do, no? We refrain. We avoid spoon feeding the information into our learners. 3 times 7, Pedro. 21, Pedro. Understand, Pedro? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Spoon feeding. I-guide natin si Pedro towards the answer. Pedro, di ba yung 3 times 7 is equivalent to 7? Dagdagan mo pa lang isang 7, and then you add another 7. Pilang 7 kita, Pedro? 3, sir. Kasi ingka kita dating 7, isa, then we add another 7, dalawa na, and then we add another 7, 3 na. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng 3, kasi 3, Pedro, no? Isang 7, usap po aling 7, then usap po 7, 3, 3, 7. 3 times 7. Ganun, Pedro, tingnan natin. So mag-umpisa tayo sa unang 7. Ilan na siya, Pedro? Eh, siyempre, sir, 7. Very good. Bang tinig talaga kaling ako sa diyanting kali si Pedro. Very good. 7 eh. 7 na lang. Maging 9 eh. 7 nga. Di ba, Pedro? Yes, sir. So, Pedro, meron tayong isang 7. So, 7 na siya. Dinagdagan pa natin ng isang 7, ng another 7. Pila yung asing sila, Pedro? Siyempre, Pedro will begin to compute that in his mind. Aandar ngayon yung kanyang CPU sa kanyang brain. Matagal. Loading, tiyog, loading. After a while, na-compute ni Pedro, Sir, 14. Very good. Sabi ko sa iyo, magaling ka, Pedro eh. Hindi ka lang nag-e-effort. So, mayroon na tayong 14, ha? 2 sevens na yung ating na-process. Eh, di ba may isa pa tayong 7? Yes, sir. O sige, mayroon na tayong ngayong, ilan na nga, Pedro? 7, sir. Kung 7, o hang 7, ay, mo kaya, sir. 14, very good. Very good, 14 eh. Pakando, Pedro. So, meron tayong 14. Eh, meron pa tayong another 7. Itong remaining 7, idadagdag natin doon sa ating 14 para maging 3 times 7. Oh, compute, Pedro. Pilay ka na. Andar naman yung CPU ni Pedro. Precision naman sa kanyang isip. Loading. Tiyog, loading. After a while, na-process ni Pedro. Kasi mas madali sa kanya yung 14 plus 7 eh. Sir, 21. Very good, Pedro. Yan ang 3 times 7. Ganun pala, sir. Turkey na po. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. You're welcome. So you see? Sino ka naghanap it, sir? Pedro. How did he arrive at the correct answer? Through the guidance, through the direction, through the assistance, through the scaffolding, o di ba? Naisingit ang dating lesson. Through the scaffolding provided by the teacher. So si Pedro, from what is known, yung dating niyang alam na addition, he now proceeds to what is not known, yung multiplication. And then through the scaffolding provided by the teacher, what is not known, yung multiplication, now becomes a part of what is known. Yung dating hindi alam ni Pedro na multiplication 3 times 7, alam na niya ngayon. Sino ang nag-construct ng meaning? Sino ang naghanap ng knowledge? Sino ang naghanap ng answer? Si Pedro. Under the guidance, under the direction of the teacher. That is constructing meaning on the part of the learner. Ano ginawa ng teacher? Nag-guide. Nag-facilitate. The teacher did not spoon-feed. Kumbaga sa istoryahang kalatrabanhon, wayag hungitan it katong teacher kay Pedro kag answer. Wayag hungitan, wayag sangsangan sa ida katong answer na 21. Pedro arrived at the correct answer. Pedro arrived at the knowledge with the guidance, with the assistance of the learner. So now, Pedro becomes a successful learner at that particular instance. No? Kung ang pag-uusapan natin lang ay yung example lang natin, Pedro, in that instance, is a successful learner. Sa susunod na mayroong question sa kanya about multiplication, yun ang gagawin niya. He will add ang tawag doon, multiplicans ba yun? Multiplicans yata yun eh. Yung i-multiply na number. So yun ang gagawin niya. In his mind, he will mentally process multiplication by adding the numbers. So yung kanyang 4 times 3 ngayon ay magiging 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. Di ba? So he will arrive at the correct answer, which is 12. Oh, hindi natuto siya. So ganun po yan, we do not spoon feed. Successful learners are active participants in the learning process. Sila po ang maghanap ng knowledge, hindi natin yun isusubo sa kanila. As a matter of fact, as far as learning is concerned, the role of the teacher is to facilitate, to guide, to supervise. Hindi na isusubo or spoon-feed yung information sa learner. Gone are those days where the teacher is a sage. Sage on the stage who acts and presents himself or herself as the soul, as the only source of knowledge, the fountain of knowledge. Gone are those days when the teacher monopolizes everything. Tapos na yung mga panahon ng pagtuturong ganun. Nowadays, at present, the teacher stays on the side. The teacher is a facilitator. The activities are performed and carried out by the learners. Anong ginagawa ng teacher? Nagga-guide, nagpa-facilitate, nagda-direct. Ibig sabihin nag-direct, he gives direction to the activity. Class, ang susunod, ganito, dapat na mangyari. See? Alright. So sabi nga natin, there should be a specific purpose. So teaching and learning becomes goal-oriented. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng gagawin ng teacher during that period within the class ay patungo para sa isang goal. Everything the class will do within that period are geared or will be geared towards, will be focused towards a specific goal. What is that goal? Whatever it is, kung ano man siya, kung anong lesson, kung anong topic, it's the same goal. Learning. Okay. Okay, number 2 tayo. Goals of the learning process. It's still about goals, no? Talagang napaka-importante na mayroong dapat goal. There should be a short-term goal, meaning goal for that particular period, and a goal for a longer period of time. Sabi nga natin kanina, the teacher is there not to spoon-feed information and knowledge, but to provide support and instructional guidance. The teacher is there to simply supervise and provide guidance. He will not perform the activity. He will not spoon-feed knowledge. Nandun siya. The teacher is there to facilitate learning. Para siyang, kumbaga sa basketball, the teacher is the coach. No? Naglalaro ba ang coach? Hindi, no? He gives instruction to his team as to how they would play. He encourages the team. He inspires the team. He holds together the team so that there will be no factions. There will be no conflicts of interest. Yeah. So that the team will remain united, and they can play very well, and they will win the game. Ganon din po sa classroom. The teacher is there to provide support, to provide scaffolding, to provide instructional guidance, so that the learners can create knowledge for themselves. They can create meaning from their experiences inside the classroom, so that they will learn. Yeah. They can create meaningful, coherent representations of knowledge. It's just a fancy way of saying so that they can learn. Yeah. They can learn effectively. They can learn meaningfully. Yung kanilang matututuhan ay makakatulong sa kanila to improve their knowledge, to improve their personalities, to solve daily problems, to enhance their understanding and interpretation of their experiences, and their understanding and their interpretation of the things they encountered in their daily lives. Ganon po yun. So the goals of the learning process is for the learners to learn, to create meaningful and coherent representations of knowledge, to achieve this end, to achieve this goal, to achieve this objective. We use, we employ, we apply learner-centered principles of teaching. Yeah. Kahit yung mga sinasabi natin mga slow learners, they are capable of learning. They just need a little bit more effort on their own part and on the part of the teacher. Over time. Sa pagbibigyan baga ng tamang panahon, sa pagdaan ng panahon, over time. At kung merong support, merong support, merong guidance from the teacher, anybody can learn. Kahit nga yung mga sinasabi natin mga physically, and even those who are intellectually challenged, they can still learn. Merong mga instructional methodologies for them. There are schools for them. There are teachers who have been especially trained to teach them. So you see, everybody can learn. Everybody can create knowledge. What do they need? They need support and instructional guidance. Usually from whom? From kanino? From the teacher. From us. Okay. And then the third one, under cognitive and metacognitive factors, construction of knowledge. So, you see, magkakaugnay-ugnay po sila, no? Magkakaugnay-ugnay. Unang-una, dun sa first one, the focus is on the nature of the learning process. The most important thing to remember there is that learning should be intentional so that the learner can create meaning from information and experience. Sa pangalawa naman, yung atin kanina, yung katatapos lang, goals of the learning process, is still related to the first one. If learning is intentional, then it is goal-oriented. So, related siya, goals of the learning process. Tapos ito ulit, construction of knowledge. Diba, nabanggit din natin kanina, construction of knowledge. This means learning. No? How do we learn? We link new information with existing knowledge in meaningful ways. We know a little about something. And then, we encounter new information, additional information about it. And so, we create knowledge in a meaningful way. Yung bagong dating, bagong absorb natin, bagong accept information, ay ating maiuugnay sa dati na nating alam. So, we revise, we modify our schema of things. That's learning. And our knowledge of things widens, lumalawak, and deepens, lumalalim. As we continue to build links, habang lumalawak yung mga connections between and among the different things that we learn, lumalawak din at lumalalim ang ating kaalaman. The same thing happens to our learners. The more they encounter new information and the more they are able to link, correlate, or connect those new bits or pieces of information with what they already know, the more meaningful their learning becomes. Their knowledge of things widens and deepens. Their schema becomes more and more complex. Yeah. And that is the reason why, as teachers, we are advised to establish a link, to establish a connection between prior knowledge and what we are about to teach. Naalala niyo ulit yung ating discussion about Gagne's events of instruction? What do we do there? We recall and activate prior knowledge. Why do we do that? To establish a connection, to establish a link, to establish a relationship between prior knowledge or prior experiences and the new information, the new knowledge to be absorbed and internalized. Bakit? Kasasabi lang natin knowledge becomes meaningful, learning becomes meaningful if new information, if new knowledge is integrated into old knowledge meaningfully. That is how learners construct knowledge. That is how we, individuals, in general, construct knowledge. In simpler terms, that is how we learn meaningfully. Ayan. And then we have the fourth one, strategic thinking. Learning is more of the learner's activity. Learner-centered tayo eh. So more of the learning task falls on the learner. And so therefore, just like in many human endeavors, excuse me. We become more we become more successful in what we do if we strategize. Meaning, we become more successful in what we are trying to do if we think of the most effective ways of doing it. That is our tendency as human beings, no? Kung mayroon tayong gagawin, ang una nating iniisip ay kung ano ang pinakamaganda, ano ang pinaka-effective na paraan upang gawin ito. Successful learners strategize. They employ strategic thinking principles to achieve complex learning goals. Hindi sila memorize lang ng memorize. They employ certain techniques to achieve what they want in terms of learning. They use reasoning, they use problem solving, and concept learning. In other words, they employ or they use their own techniques, their own strategies in order to learn more effectively. Halimbawa, di ba sa school, usually mayroon naman mga memorize. So, say for example, in memorizing a series of items, halimbawa, planets in the solar system, examples of animals that belong to the feline or cat family, examples of mammals, minimemorize yan mga bata, members of ASEAN, members of the United Nations, those who have been presidents of the Philippines, presidents of the United States, minimemorize yan. So, successful learners will strategize, yung mga magagaling na estudyante. In order to memorize things, they would make use of, say, a mnemonic device. Yan. Mnemonic device. Hindi ko nasulat sa slide class eh. Sorry ha. Hindi pagkasya. Yan. Mnemonic device. Yung bang ginagamit natin ng mga acronyms, mga letters of the first line, letters of the first word, and then we create a sentence out of it. Ang tawag dyan ay mnemonic device. The most common example, yung palaging ginagamit, when the teacher, sa science, no? Or sa art, the teacher would ask the children, the learners, the pupils, class, what are the different colors of the rainbow? Sigawan ka agad yung mga bata. Anong isisigaw? Blue, yellow, orange, hindi, no? They will shout or scream the name Roy G. Biv. Ma'am, Roy G. Biv. Sabi naman ni teacher, correct. ang tiniisa-isahin na nila. R means ma'am, red. O, ay kung lalaki ang teacher, sir, orange. Ay yung white, sir, yellow. Yung G, green, and so on and so forth. Ang tawag dyan is mnemonic, pertaining to memory. Mnemonic device. Yan. Yung iba naman, they use graphic organizers. Halimbawa, it's a complicated story. Instead of just mentally processing the story, learners, yung talagang gumagamit ng mga strategies, would create a model. They would draw a circle. This is Pedro, the bida in the story. Then he draws another circle. This is Esperanza, his love interest. Ito naman si Pablo, another circle. So he uses graphic organizers. May mga arrows, may mga other symbols, may mga stars, kung ano siyang gagamitin. In order for him to graphically process the story, so a complicated story becomes simpler to process and understand because now the relationships among the different characters in the story are represented in a more concrete way or manner. Kikita niya yung mga linya, mga boxes, mga circles niya. Madali niya ngayong ma-organize. Ganun po, strategic thinking. Siguro ginawa niyo rin ito ng mga estudyante kayo, elementary, high school. Pedro, what are the, puro na lang si Pedro, iba naman. Pablito, what are the 4 fundamental operations? Isip ka agad si Pedro, my dear Aunt Sally, my M. Ma'am, multiplication. Dear, ma'am, division. Aunt A. Addition pa, ma'am. Sally, yes. Ma'am, at saka subtraction. Lala ni Pablito. Very good, Pablito. Yung mga mnemonic devices niya. Kuminsan yung mga planeta, binibigyan ng mga, or ginagawa ng mga sentences. Those are examples of mnemonic device, which is an example of strategic thinking. One of the techniques used by students, successful students, to enhance their ability to memorize and understand things. Mga concept mapping, problem-solving techniques, meron silang mga ganyan, yung mga successful learners. Okay, the next one, under cognitive and metacognitive factors, thinking about thinking. Successful learners think about their own thinking. And because they know their strengths, they know their limitations, they can set realistic or reasonable goals for themselves. Kung alam nilang hindi naman sila kagalingan sa mathematics, they will create learning strategies para sila'y matuto. And they can set reasonable or realistic goals for themselves. Hindi naman ako magbabaledictorian kasi alam kong matalino naman sa akin yung aking classmate. So, ito ang aking magiging goal. Yeah. And to achieve this goal, this is what I will do. Okay. At saka, those kinds of learners, yung mga successful learners, they monitor their own progress towards these goals. How do they monitor that? Every time na may quiz, they make their own record. Yan. Uy, mas mataas pala ako sa quiz neto kaysa sa sinundan. Nag-improve ako sa mathematics Itong boses ko lang hindi nag-improve. Dali lang class, kain lang ako ng strip sheet. Yan. Minomonitor nila. Pag-test ulit, they will make another entry in their record. So yun. Nakikita nila, patas ako ng patas. I'm improving. Some other students even monitor and analyze which part they are weak. Halimbawa, may test. They make a list of those items which they got wrong. Nagkamali ako sa number 5, wrong din ako sa 11, mali ulit ako sa 17, yung gano'n. Ang gagawin nila doon class? What's the purpose? Yun ang kanilang pag-aaralan ng gusto. See, they strategize. So that the next time they encounter those concepts, they already know them. Alam mo nila, nag-aralan na nila. Kasi nakita nila, nagkamali sila doon. So they monitor their own progress. Thinking about thinking. Learners, successful learners, think about how they think. They monitor their own progress. They analyze the way they learn. Yeah. Thinking about thinking. Ano kaya magagawa ng mga teachers to help learners do this? To monitor their own progress. Yung teacher mismo mayroong records. Well, of course, sa bagay, required yun. Magre-record talaga ng mga test. Ibig sabihin ay, well, the teacher can assist the pupil or the learner in learning those areas in which he is weak. Kung alam ng teacher na nahihirapan itong batang ito sa isang area ng mathematics, di gagawin niya. Tuturuan niya. Isang batang mahina sa reading, tuturuan niya. Bugnoy, halika muna dito. Meron pa naman akong extra 20 minutes before my next class. Dito muna tayo, basa-basa ka sa tabi ko. Mga 5 to 10 minutes lang. Kasi yung natitirang 10 minutes, magmimerienda pa ako. Bibili ako ng panutsa. Tsaka kakain ako ng ice candy para may energy ako for my next subject. Basa Buknoy, basa ka dyan sa tabi ko. The muscles of the... Ano, Buknoy? Anong muscles? Muscles ka lang. Beto ba? Ano ka na ba? Hindi yan muscles. Muscles. So, natututo si Buknoy. Okay, so ganun yun. Thinking about thinking. The Bingins. Yan Bingins Buknoy. Vengeance yan. Oh, vengeance. Okay, next, number 6. Context of learning. We are still under cognitive and metacognitive factors. Cognitive, alam na natin. Konting commercial lang. Cognitive, alam na natin. From the word cognition, cognition means thinking. Cognition means learning also. So cognitive pertaining to mental activities, intellectual activities, intellectual pursuits. Ano yun naman ngayon yung metacognitive factors? Metacognitive. Okay. Meta means before or above, not above. So kung yung cognitive ay about thinking, sa taas noon is still thinking, but this time we are already thinking about thinking. Di ba yung katatapos lang natin? Thinking about thinking. Metacognitive yan. So dito tayo sa cognitive and metacognitive factors. context of learning. See, I think it was only in the previous video that we discussed context of learning. No? Doon kay Vygotsky. Yeah. Learning is influenced by environmental factors, which include culture, technology, and instructional practices. In our discussion of Vygotsky's sociocultural constructivist theory, we learned that learning occurs in a context. Learning is culture-driven. Learning is culture-based. Culture and the social environment exerts a very strong influence on learning. That is what we learned in that lesson. Yung ating culture, no? Our practices, our traditions, our language, the way we dress, the way we behave as a group, our way of life in short, affects or influences learning tremendously. Also technology and instructional practices. Now, because learning is culture-based, we should be sensitive to the culture of our students. We should show them respect with regards to their social and cultural background, even their economic and family background. We should be sensitive to these things. When teaching, kapag tayo nagsasalita towards them or nagle-lecture sa kanila, when we are talking to them, during the preparation of instructional materials, during the preparation of learning activities, yung mga gagawin inside the classroom, we should take these things into consideration. Halimbawa, huwag tayong pipili ng mga instructional materials that can be offensive to a certain culture. Malay mo, mayroon kang estudyanteng, halimbawa, ganito class. Drawing ng mga bata. Sa kartulina, halimbawa, or sa PowerPoint slide. Doon sa picture ay iba-ibang mga bata. Tapos mayroong indigent, mayroong halimbawa ay ita. Tapos kunyari ay yung ita doon ay mukhang napakakawawa. Para talaga siyang yung pagiging minority niya ba ay na-emphasize pa. So, yung estudyante mo doon, who belongs to that tribe, hindi mo alam na mayroon ka palang estudyante gano'n. Kala mo talagang may team lang siya. Yun pala ita talaga. So, he will be offended, no? Kasi, para siya, siguro may embarrass siya. Pero hindi lang siguro, kundi malamang. Ano yun? Culture, technology. We should be sensitive to their culture, their background, no? We should respect their beliefs, lalo sa religion, no? Religious beliefs. We should respect each other. Kaya nga, bawal sa mga schools natin to dictate a particular religious sect or specific church. Yeah? Halimbawa, yung mga, members of, say, Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, example lang ito, class. Baka mayroong members inyo ng Jehovah's Witness. It is not my intention to offend you or to disrespect you. Ito lang ay example natin. Halimbawa, yung Paglagay ng kamay sa dibdib during flag ceremonies. Schools do not require them to do that, di ba? Bakit? Because our system, because our government, because our schools respect their beliefs. Yeah. So sa classroom natin, halimbawa, umuulan sa labas. Hindi nakapag-flag ceremony. Sabi ng teacher, class, dito na lang tayo mag-flag ceremony ha. Meron namang maliit ditong flag. Kasi malakas ang ulan sa labas eh. Ayaw kung kayo ay sipunin. Opo ma'am, opo sir, dito na lang tayo mag-flag. Magpa-flag na tayo mga bata ha. Ilagay ang kamay sa dibdib. Bakit ikaw hindi ka naglagay ng kamay sa dibdib? Sir or ma'am, ako po kasi ay member ng Jehovah's Witness. Sabi namin ay hindi po kami maglalagay. Hindi, nung hindi maglalagay, magpa-flag na tayo. Lagay mo yan. Bugbugin kita, tapon kita sa labas ng bintana. Hindi pwedeng gawin po yon, bawal yon. Pwede kang kasuhan ng pupil or ng kanyang parents. Learner-centered teaching requires us to respect the learner in terms of culture, religious beliefs, his rights as a person, as a pupil. Karapatan niya kasi yun eh. Di ba dito sa Pilipinas meron tayong freedom of religion. See? That is his right. Free siya. He is free to do that. Ganon din sa ibang sekta, sa ibang religious sects. Halimbawa, member of the SDA. Kung meron na mga SDA sa inyo, it is not my intention to offend you or to disrespect you. This is just an example. Class, absent ako ng Friday kasi pa-check up ako sa doktor. So itong ating activity, instead of Friday, ay gagawin natin ng Saturday kasi available ako ng Saturday. Sigawan niyo mga bata. Yes, sir. May isang maliit na boses na nagsalita. Sir, ako po ay SDA, hindi po ako makaka-join bukas kasi po magsisimba ako. No, hindi pwede. Activity ito eh. Wala kang grade sa akin. Anong mga SDA sa akin? Pasok kayo lahat. Hindi po pwede yun. You can be sued. Pwede kang Yeah. Ang ibig sabihin po ng sue, kakasuhan ka. Kaso. Meron kang kaso. Yan o. You can be sued. Lagyan natin ng diyan. You can be sued. Pero yung kanyang pinaka-root word ay sue. Yan. Meron kang kaso. May sue. Kasi namimilit. Kasi namimilit ka ng estudyante. Ano nangyari sa'yo? Mayroon kang kaso. That's context of learning. Yung kanyang religious beliefs. You should respect. So that there will be fairness and equality in our class. In our class. Proceed tayo guys. Technology tayo. Ito ang mahirap some of our classrooms, we lack technology. Buti nga tayo merong, lalo ngayon, for online, modules online, Zoom, Google. Kung wala kang technology, walang gamit, no gadgets, wala, nga ka talaga as a teacher and as a student. Nga ka talaga. Wala eh. Anong gagawin mo? Malagang maglupasay ka ng technology. This pandemic has emphasized the importance of technology in education. Kahit walang pandemic, importante pa rin yung technology. No? You are lucky because your generation grew up with technology. Your generation is familiar, even adept. You are good with technology. And that is an advantage to all of you as future teachers. You can use your technological skills in effecting learner-centered teaching and learning. Lalo mga bata ngayon, many of them are dependent on gadgets, no? When it comes to learning. So maswerte kayo, technology is available to you and you have the skills and knowledge to use such technology. Yung aming henerasyon ay naghabol na lang, no? When I started teaching, we didn't have computers. Wala kami. Anong PowerPoint. So yata kinahina sa Manila paper, sa kartulina. Kung walang-wala, sa lumang kalendaryo. Nakikita pa tong mga numero sa iyo doon. Diyos me. Kung walang-wala na talaga, paste kat suyat sa blackboard. Now, you have this PowerPoint presentation. You can make use of animation. You can insert videos. You can insert music. Lahat pwedeng gawin because of technology. And technology can help or assist teachers in their teaching. So learner-centered learning and teaching is so much easier to do or fulfill today than before. What else can we add here? Yung mga instructional practices, no? Ibig sabihin, yung mga strategies, mga methodologies employed or used by the teacher should be appropriate. In giving examples, in giving explanations, in preparing materials, and in designing learning activities and experiences. They should all be aligned. They should all match. They should all be congruent with the context of learning, including the culture, including the physical environment. No? Context din yun yung physical environment. That is why we try to provide our learners with the best classrooms we can afford. Pinapaganda ni Ma'am at ni Sir yung kanilang classroom. Lalagyan ng mga, kung ano mga structures din. May mga posters, may kung anong mga reading corner, may math corner, social studies corner. Lahat ng corners nandoon. Nilalagyan ni Ma'am ng magandang kortina, yung malamig sa mata, yan, kulay green or mint. Yan. Nagsusolicit sa mga public officials sa parents ng ventilador so that the room will become well ventilated and the pupils will not keep on perspiring or sweating during instruction. Pati si teacher, hindi rabuno pamuyos it gaos. See? Yan. Proceed tayo, no? Next. Ayaw ng umandar. Yan. Alis din. So, next category tayo, no? So, ilan nga ulit yun sa first category natin? 6, no? Yung ating na-discuss. The first category, kaya letter B na yan, yung letter A kanina is cognitive and metacognitive factors. Bahala na kayong mag-organize sa inyong mga notes, nandito naman sa ating module. Balikan nyo lang yung part na may list siya. Basta doon sa category letter A, cognitive and metacognitive factors, the 6 principles we discussed under that are nature of the learning process, goals of the learning process, construction of knowledge, strategic thinking, thinking about thinking, and context of learning. Yun po yung mga nasa category A, yung anim na yon. Okay. So let us proceed. Let us discuss the next category, motivational and affective factors. Under this, we're going to talk about the first one. Ito, motivational and emotional influences influences of learning or on learning. Okay. The rich internal world of thoughts, meaning things that are going on in our mind, yung mga laman ng ating isip. Internal world of thoughts, such as our beliefs. Yan. Kasama yan sa internal world of thoughts. Our goals as learners, our goals as individuals. Kasama yan sa internal world of thoughts, including our expectations for success or failure. Kapag mayroon tayong ginagawa, mayroon tayong expectations. Nakikita natin kung maganda yung kanyang direction, maganda yung kanyang progress, maganda yung kanyang development. Kado ka nga, kung tatrabaho, maganda ang magiging resulta nito. Yay! Meron namang kasing pananala ka lang, mapalpak gadol ka lang. So, all of these things, all of these factors that are part of the internal world of thoughts, they can enhance, they can improve, or they can also interfere with the learner's quality of thinking and information processing. Meaning, yung mga beliefs, yung mga goals and expectations, pwede silang makatulong, no? They can help the learner learn meaningfully. On the other hand, pwede rin silang maging sagabal. They can also be obstacles or hindrances to meaningful learning, depending on the kind of beliefs, the kind of goals, and the kind of expectations that they have in mind. If they believe positively about their learning, if they have reasonable or realistic goals, and they have realistic or reasonable expectations regarding their own learning, then they may all lead to meaningful learning. But if the beliefs, the goals, the expectations, if the beliefs are all negative beliefs, all pessimistic, if the goals are unrealistic and unreasonable, the goals are beyond the learner's capacity to achieve, if the expectations do not correspond to reality, if it is not based on facts, then there will be frustration, there will be disappointment on the part of the learner, and meaningful learning may not be realized. And so, motivational. Motivation is very important here, class. Motivational and emotional influences on learning. Let's start with motivation. Motivation is very important in learning. Kumbaga, it is the force that will drive, that will push the learner to learn. Motivation is the learner's fuel to learn. Kumbaga sa motor, kumbaga sa sasakyan, kumbaga sa kotse, motivation is the gasolina, fuel. vehicle will not run without fuel. Yung motor ko, naubusan ng gasolina, biglang tumigil eh. Ayaw nang umandar. Hindi ko naman siya pwedeng lagyan ng petrolyo or tubig. Ganon din po ang learner. Without proper motivation, learning will not take place. Meaningful learning will not take place. Hindi pa na ako nag-move. Ayun na, tama. 7 pala motivation. And so therefore, it follows, no? It goes without saying that the learner should be motivated to learn. The learner should be motivated to learn in order for him to have that fuel to reach his destination. Ano yung kanyang destinasyon? Learning. That brings us to the question, how can a learner motivate himself? Well, in the previous slide, not in the previous slide, but in the slide, this one here that we're looking at, there's this word, goals. So if the learner has very clearly defined goals in his mind with regards to his learning, whether it is short-term or long-term, that will help him sustain his motivation for learning. Ang kanyang short-term goal ay, I want to learn how to compute binomials, how to multiply binomials. Short-term goal, kasi yun ang lesson for that day about binomials. That's the short-term goal. Yun ang kanyang gustong ma-achieve on that particular period. So, short period of time. 1 hour and 30 minutes kunyari. Yun ang kanyang goal para sa kanyang sarili. Gusto kong matuto ng binomials. Paano silang i-process, paano silang i-compute, blah, blah, blah. Short-term goal ko yan. Tinanong siya ng kanyang katabi, Pare, bakit gusto mong matutunan yan? Sagot niya, because I want to be an engineer someday. Long-term goal. Maliwanag na maliwanag yun sa kanyang isip. He can already see himself as an engineer. He can already see himself as a civil engineer. He can see himself designing buildings and bridges and hospitals and all kinds of structures. He has a well-defined goal as a learner and as a person. His dedication and devotion to that goal will be his fuel. That will be his motivation. So his interest to learn, his motivation to learn, his drive to learn will be sustained, meaning it will remain with him. Yun, motivation. So that's very important, no? So the emotional state din, it's very important also. Yung kanyang feelings, yung kanyang emotions towards learning, dapat puros positive. Medyo mahirap itong subject na ito, pero kaya ko ito. Things like those. I can do this with the help of my teacher, with the help of my parents, with the help of my classmates. I know I can do this with the help of the Lord, with the help of God. I can do this. See? He has that positive outlook in life, and he has that positive outlook with regards to learning. Kung po yan, mga emotional influences, yun ang mga motivational influences, how a learner drives himself to learn, how he keeps his interest to learn, how he motivates himself to learn, how he is motivated to learn. So ganun yun yung mga highly motivated learners, they can sustain, they can keep their desire, their enthusiasm to learn. Yun. So what happens? they learn. See? In a learner-centered classroom, the teacher provides learning experiences. The teacher provides a psychological environment that promotes motivation. See? Okay. Next is intrinsic motivation to learn. So, katatapos lang natin yung motivation. Let me start class with the word intrinsic. In education, we oftentimes talk about two kinds of motivation. The first one is, one is extrinsic motivation. Di ko na naman nalagay sa ating slide. Ayan. Extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation comes from without. It comes from outside. It usually comes in the form of an immediate reward or a promise of a reward. Parang ganito klase. Ako tatay, sabi ko sa aking anak, anak, mag-aral ka mabuti. Pag matataas ang grades mo, I will buy a new bicycle for you. Yung maganda anak, yung medyo mamahalin kasi mataas naman ang grades mo. Kaya yun ang magiging premyo ko sa iyo pag mataas ang grades. Opo tanay, mag-aaral ako mabuti. Pagdating nga sa school, aral talaga. Studio todo-todo. Why? Why is he studying very hard? Is he after learning or he's after the bicycle? He's after the bicycle. Yun ang kanyang motivation. The bicycle serves as his extrinsic motivation. Hindi siya internal. Galing siya sa labas. You compare that learner with this learner. Ako halimbawa yung learner. Gusto ko talagang matuto itong mathematics na ito. I enjoy mathematics. I want to learn. I know that I can use this in my life outside our classroom. Well, the child may not have that kind of understanding yet dahil bata pa siya. Pero sa kanyang isip sa kanyang puso, talagang he understands, he realizes that mathematics is necessary. Very, very important subject in school and in life. At saka, di ba kanina, pangarap niya maging engineer. At saka gusto niyang matuto talaga. So his motivation is not any material object, any reward. His motivation is learning itself. Because he enjoys learning, he loves to learn things. And he knows that he himself will benefit from the things he learned. So hindi na niya kailangan bigyan ng kung ano ng reward. Hindi na niya kailangan pangakuan ng kung ano ng reward. Nobody needs to promise him any reward, to give him any reward for him to study and learn. Learning itself is his motivation. It comes from within him. As a learner, ang tawag po natin dyan ay intrinsic motivation. That's what we call intrinsic motivation. Ayaw magsulat. Bahala ka sa buhay mo. Yan, yung word na intrinsic dyan, no? It comes from within the learner. He doesn't need any promise of reward. Intrinsic po yun. Sa palagay natin, saan doon ang mas effective? Saan doon ang mas maganda in terms of learning? Intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? Siyempre, sir, mga pangutaan na kapar. Siyempre, jokes lang. Intrinsic motivation. Learners should be motivated intrinsically in order to learn meaningfully. Okay, number 9 tayo. Effects of motivation on effort. Yung motivation, parang fuel. No? What drives us? What pushes us? What sustains our interest and enthusiasm and desire to do something? In our case, learning. Yung effort, the amount of energy, the amount of time, the amount of strength, the amount of attention, the amount of commitment and dedication, the extent of commitment and dedication we give to learning. Yan, yung effort. Kung titingnan ka agad natin, magka-correlate, sila, no? Kahit walang diskusyon, kita ka agad natin eh. The higher the motivation, natural, the greater the effort. And vice versa. The lesser motivation, the lesser the effort. Habang tumataas ang level ng motivation, naturally, logically, expectedly, tataas din ang level ng effort. The more motivated I am as a learner, the more desirous I am as a learner, the more enthusiastic I am as a learner, the more energy, the more time, the more attention, the more dedication, the more commitment I will give to my own learning. Study ako ng todo-todo because I want to learn. Gawa ko ng mga projects lahat because I want to learn. I listen to my teacher attentively because I want to learn. I participate during class discussions because I want to learn. See? Eh kung hindi, wala ko interest matuto. Gusto ko lang makapasa. Kasi sabi ni tatay, pag nakapasa ko, bibili niya ako ng cellphone na bago. So yun lang, purpose ko sa buhay, magkaroon ng bagong cellphone. Makapasa lang ha, makapasa. Ang gagawin ko sa learner, hindi. Pakuya-kuya ko, makapasa rin. So kaya nagganon yun. As already mentioned earlier, learning, because it is a complex process, require effort on the part of the learner. The information, the knowledge will not just appear in his mind. It will not be spoon-fed to him by the teacher. This is not like a kind of food that he can buy from the store and eat and digest and it becomes part of his body. Eh kung pwede lang ganun ay, punta ka sa tindahan, pabili po ng knowledge about astronomy. Halika. Nandito ang outlet, sasaksakan kita ng knowledge. Kunyari, later, mayroon ng mga nilagyan na sa utak natin, ng mga drives, mga memory. Mayroon na tayong storage devices sa ating utak, no? Bakit di natin alam? Malay mo. In some centuries to come, ganun ang mga tao. May mga USB slot sa likod, tatlong lalagyan ng USB, parang laptop. Pabili po ng knowledge about engineering. Kung lang po, 1,000 pesos. Halika, lagyan kita ng knowledge. Itong folder na ito, puro ito, about engineering. Yan, topic na yan. Halika. Talikod, isasaksak ito sa USB slot mo sa likod eh. Hindi saksak, klak. Maghintay ka, magda-download tayo. Parang gano'n. Then later, mga kurso na ang bibili, no? Pabili po ng kurso na medicine. Ay, mahal ito. $25 million. Ay, dala ko po yung $25 million pambayad sa kursong medicine. Ito po nakalagay sa bayok, yung pera. Mayroon siyang $25 million ang dalay bayok. So going back to our discussion, kung ano mga commercial kasi. Effort is required on the part of the learner in order for him to learn. So dahil kailangan ng effort, mag-effort talaga siya. He will need to invest time and effort on learning. He needs to be persistent. Alam niyo yung persistent? Somebody who does not surrender. Somebody who does not give up. Somebody who does not stop easily. Yung mamatyaga, masigasig. Even he fails the first time, he gets up, tries again, until he succeeds. Yan. So, ang importante kasi dito, motivate siya. No? The learner must have motivation first. Without any amount of motivation, we cannot expect any amount of effort on the part of the learner. Pag walang motivation, hindi rin yan mag-effort. That is why, generally, teachers give incentives so that the learners will be motivated and they will spend more effort in doing their schoolwork. So, yung mga teachers may linyahan na ang sino unang makakagawa, mas mataas ang grade. Pinakamagandang project, siyempre, pinakamataas ang grade. Meron pang special reward, things like those. Kaya yung mga simple acknowledgement, simple gestures to appreciate good work or good behavior on the part of the learner, na-acknowledge yan, na-appreciate yan. Those things can help. Yung simple, very good, palakpakan kay Juan for a very good answer, things like those, nakakapagdagdagan sa motivation. Lalo siyang mag-effort. So, again, we should try our level best to create a psychological environment inside the classroom that will promote motivation on the part of the learner. Why? Because motivation leads to greater effort. Greater effort, greater chances of meaningful learning. Okay, next. Punta tayo ng next na tayo. Developmental and social factors. Okay. Developmental influences of or on learning. Still remember our discussion regarding the different stages of cognitive development according to Piaget? In that lesson, we enumerated and discussed the different stages in cognitive development, and we learned that there are certain tasks that are appropriate for certain stages of development. Because for every stage, learners think in a specific way. Learners behave in a certain way. So dapat, yung kanilang mga learning experiences should be appropriate to their developmental level. So ganun yun. So first, learning should be holistic. No? Kaya nga, mayroong mga subjects that aim for intellectual development, subjects that aim for physical development, for emotional and social development, because learning should be holistic, meaning it should target the entire personality of the child. Yung kanyang physical well-being, yung kanyang intellectual aspect of his personality, emotional and social aspects or domains, they should all be taken into account. They should all be taken into consideration and they should all be given due attention. Kaya mayroon tayong mga physical education for the physical aspect. So, yung pag-aaral o yung learning is not just memorizing things, understanding things, reading books, writing. We also need to take care of our body. Sound mind in a sound body, including the emotional, social, and even the spiritual aspects or the spiritual domain. Kasi, it's part of our personality. It's part of our being humans, being human beings. Yeah. Mahirap naman kung napakatalino nga, pero napabayaan yung katawan, very sickly naman. At saka, hindi halos makatayo because of his, weakness. Hindi siya nakapag-exercise, things like those. Yung kanyang emotional aspect, very immature. Yung kanyang social ability, yung kanyang social intelligence. See? Hindi marunong mag-socialize, he cannot deal with people. He hates people. Things like those. So again, learning should be geared towards the development of the full human being, holistic, holistic. Holistic, holistic. Walang W sa harap. Individuals learn best when material is appropriate to their developmental level and is presented in an enjoyable and interesting manner or interesting ways. As already mentioned just a while ago, activities and learning experiences should be appropriate to a learner's developmental level. Kaya nga hindi tinuturo sa grade 1 ang trigonometry. Diba? Although wala naman siyempre teacher na gagawa ng ganun. No teacher in his or her right mind would do that. I'm just using it as an extreme example of teaching something that is not within a learner's developmental stage. Siyempre, ang tuturo sa grade 1, yung bagay sa kanyang level as a grade 1 pupil and as a person. So that the learning experiences will be meaningful to him. He can relate to it, he can relate to the lessons, he can relate to the activities, and he can absorb and internalize, meaning he can learn the new material. Kung ano yung tinuturo ni ma'am sa grade 1, dahil siya ay talaga namang grade 1 pupil, ay kanyang ma-absorb. Matututo siya. Yan. Developmental influences on learning. In the same way that we do not teach 1 times 1, 2 times 2 in college, because that is not appropriate for their developmental stage. Halimbawa kayo, tinuruan ng 2 plus 2. Di ba mainis ka? Di ba namang klaseng lesson ito? Ano ako, grade 1? Hindi bagay sa yung level eh. In the same way na nabibwisit kayo, sa isang lesson na napakasimple, yung grade 1, mainis din. Sa isang lesson na napakahirap naman for his level. So you see, ano ang dapat? Yung tugma sa level niya. Doon sa kanya yung 1 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 2. Sa atin naman yung mga mahihirap na mathematics. Kaya nga tayo sa college ay mga statistics na, ganyan. Kasi yun ang bagay, yun ang appropriate baga sa inyong developmental level. Okay. So, the most important thing to remember here is that every aspect of our personality should be given due attention. Physical, intellectual, emotional, social, spiritual aspects or domains of our personality should be given due attention. And all experiences, learning activities, all lessons should be appropriate to the developmental level of the learner. Kung mga grade 6 yan, mga 12 years old, siyempre lahat ng activities ng mga lessons yung bagay sa kanilang level. Things that they can relate to, things that they can process in their level. Alright, number 11. Social influences on learning. Well, as we can see here on the slide, learning can be enhanced when the learner has an opportunity to interact and to collaborate with others on instructional tasks. What's the point? Interact and collaborate with others. Let us approach this with a question. Which do you think is more effective in most children, or among most children? Generally speaking tayo, which one is more effective? Individual activity or group activity? Based on this principle, which of the two is more effective? Let me go back. Learning can be enhanced, learning can be improved, learning can be more effective if the learner has an opportunity to interact. Ilan ang kailangang tao dyan pag mag-interact? Di ba marami? Collaborate. Ilang taong kailangan dyan? Ilang learners ang kailangan dyan? Di ba marami? At least two. No? You cannot collaborate with yourself, with your own self. With others. See? Mayroong others. Ibig sabihin, mayroong ibang learners. On instructional tasks, yung kanilang mga gagawin daw, they are more effective if they can interact, collaborate with others. Going back to our question, which one do you think is more effective? Individual activity or group activity? Yung nasa loob, kunyari tayo ng classroom. Science, halimbawa. Siyempre, based on this principle, group activities are more effective than individual activities. Generally speaking yan, ha? This applies to most children. But not all, because there are children who prefer to work alone. But they are few compared with children who prefer to work with a group. Bakit kaya? Well, sabi nga dito, we are already talking about social influences. As already mentioned several times during our discussions, learning does not take place in a vacuum. It takes place in an environment. It takes place within a context. So our surroundings, our environment, whether they are objects or people, affect the way we learn. Naalala nyo yung lesson natin about Vygotsky? Culture exerts a very strong influence on learning. The group exerts a strong influence on learning. The group can enhance our learning. The group can enhance our motivation. They can motivate us to exert more effort on our own learning and the learning of the group. So malakas yung kanyang influence. No? We learn inside the classroom. We learn not only from the teacher. We also learn from each other. Learners learn from each other. Kaya nga mayroong mga classroom interaction, may mga group recitations, may mga group activities. Because of this principle, learners learn from each other. Yan, social influences on learning. Learners communicate and learn with classmates and peers. Also, the environment, no? The context influences the learning. Influences learning. So as much as possible, we should give a background on the lesson. It should be placed, it should be located within a context. Bigyan natin yung background. No? Huwag tayong planets ng planets. Bigyan natin sila ng background. Let us enable them to see the bigger picture, that planets are just part of a bigger system called the solar system. Gusto mo, expand mo pa yun eh. The solar system is part of the galaxy. The galaxy is part of the universe. Yeah. So let's proceed. Now we go to the individual differences factors. This is already the last category of factors that influence or affect, or last category of principles pertaining to learner-centered teaching. Okay, so under this, we have the first one, individual differences in learning. Okay. I just forgot on which lecture video, I mentioned that each learner is unique. Meaning, kalimutan ko lang kung saan po ito nabanggit eh. Basta na-mention ko na ito before. Each learner is unique. Ibig sabihin, class, meron siyang sarili niyang personality. Each learner has his own set of abilities. Each learner has his own capabilities. Each learner has his own talents. Each learner has his own strengths. Meron din siyang sarili niyang weaknesses, which are different from those of his peers and classmates. No two individuals are exactly the same. That's the whole point there. Each individual is special in the sense that nobody else is exactly like him. Diba sabi ko nga sabi ko nga before, even identical twins differ in some way. Yes, they may be identical, meaning they look exactly the same physically, but they will be certain or definite to differ in certain parts of their personality. They may have different interests. Yung isa ay mahilig sa sports, yung isa naman ay mahilig sa music, yung isa hindi. Yung isa ay ibang paboritong pagkain, iba naman yung isa doon sa kambal. Yung isa ay ibang temperament, iba naman yung isa. Yung isa ay pasensyoso, itong isa may init ng ulo, init boy. Ganun yun. Yung isa ay, may pagka-outgoing. Ito namang isa, mayroong pagka-introvert. Pero identical twins yan. They look exactly alike. See? Learners are like that. They are unique. They have their own learning styles. They have their own ways of processing information. They have their own learning goals. They have their own interests and needs and capacities. So you see. So all of these things should be taken into consideration inside the classroom. What this implies to us as teachers or future teachers in your case is that in our classroom, we should prepare or design different instructional experiences. Iba-iba po dapat ang ginagawa sa classroom to cater to the different needs and interests of our learners. Still remember our discussion about multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner? In that lesson, we learned that children have different intelligences. Meaning they are good at many things and they differ in areas in which they excel. Yung iba magaling sa mathematics, yung iba sa language, yung iba sa social studies because they are good at memorizing things. Memorize sa mga lugar, memorize sa mga events, memorize sa mga pangalan ng mga tao, even the dates. So they are good at things like that. Hindi doon sila magaling. Let us provide experiences inside the classroom, learning experiences, no, that will cater to their different forms of interests or kinds, these different interests and different needs. So that our teaching will be more learner-centered. Yeah. And let us accept our pupils for who they are. Magaling sa mathematics eh. Huwag natin siyang pwersahin na maging magaling din sa lahat ng ibang subjects. Nandun yung kanyang aptitude, nandun yung kanyang interest, nandun yung kanyang intelligence. Hindi, yun. Oh. Let us help him develop his interest and skills or intelligence in other areas, but never should we force them. Katinik-tinik ka sa mathematics, daok ya ka sa English, panis ka pala. Hamakin mo yan. Diba? Teachers need to examine or help students examine their learning preferences. Ano ba talaga ang hilig ng batang ito? Yeah, that's the question. Pag nasagot na ng teacher, napansin ko, mahilig siya sa art. Bigyan ko siya ng mga activities where he can use his interest and talent in art. Ganun yun. Ikukuhan ko ito. I-connect sa lesson namin bukas sa social studies. Battle of Tirad Pass. Buknoy, magaling ka pala sa drawing. Yan. Special activity mo ito, ha? Mag-drawing ka ng specific scene dun sa battle as you see it in your mind. Yes, sir. Magaling ko mag-drawing, sir. Alam ko, Buknoy. Kaya nga binigyan kita ng special activity na ganito. And I will use that in my class. See? Tuwang-tuwa ngayon si Buknoy. Imagine yung drawing niya gagamitin ni ma'am o ni sir sa kanyang klase. Okay. Next item under individual differences factors, yung susunod sa individual differences in learning and diversity. So, kasasabi pa lang natin yung diversity kasi differences yan. Iba-iba yung ating mga learners kasi. So, we already know that they possess different characteristics, they possess different talents, capabilities, and proficiencies. They have different competencies, they have different strengths. Ano ngayon? Alam na natin yan. Let us now apply that knowledge in designing different forms, different kinds of learning activities and learning experiences for our students para ma-meet natin yung kanilang mga interests. They will be motivated further to study, and even if we have different students, no, learners that come from diverse, from varied, from different social backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, family and economic backgrounds, kahit iba-ibang kanilang pinanggalingan, they can still all relate to our teaching and activities that we provide to our class because they are of different kinds and forms. Iba-iba yung ating mga activities eh. So, isa dyan tatama sa kanilang interest. Yung iba hindi masyado, pero so susunod, sila naman. Ganun yun. Not everybody not all students will manifest or demonstrate exactly the same level of interest towards an activity. Yung iba dyan, interesado. Yung iba, hindi masyado. Yung iba, wala talaga. Bakit? Because of the activity. That's not within the range of their interest. Pero pag nagswak sa kanilang, tumugma sa kanilang interest, they will be very interested. Mga panimati kinatmado, mapaka-recite kina. So we make our learning experiences and activities as diverse as possible. Hanggat maaari nating bago-baguhin, iba-ibahin, gawin po natin sa abot ng ating makakaya. Alright, the last one. The last one under individual differences factors, no? Standards and assessment. I understand that you have this subject called assessment, no, under Ma'am Grace. So, siguro naman maliwanag nito sa inyo at this point, no, yung assessment. Bakit kailangan mag-assess? to determine the extent of learning, to improve learning. We assess whether we are making progress in terms of learning, whether our teaching strategies and methodologies, our approaches, our materials are effective. Kasi pag nag-assess ka at puro zero lahat, that says something about your learners, but it also says something about you as teacher. Baka naman ang problema ay nasa teacher. Baka mali ang method, mali ang ginamit na gamit, mali ang naging objective, mali ang pag-assess. The objective is, at the end of the 60-minute period, the student should be able to multiply 2-digit numbers. 2-digit, tapos yung test mo ay 347 times 763. 2 digits ka dyan. See? Ikaw palang maling teacher eh. So, assessment helps us improve learning and teaching. Good teaching will lead to good or effective or meaningful learning. And vice versa. Kapag nagturo ang teacher ng pantoy-untoy, walang direksyon, walang focus, walang kaplano-plano, how can he expect his learners to learn? Standards and assessment. So there should always be assessment so that the teacher, meaning you, will know whether your learners, whether your students are learning or not. Based on that, malalaman mo rin, makikita mo rin if the methodologies, the strategies, the techniques, yung mga gamit mo sa pagtuturo ay effective din. That's the whole point there. Right? Okay. So those are the 14 principles of learner-centered teaching. So like I mentioned, these 14 principles were grouped into 4 categories. 4 categories, namely cognitive and metacognitive factors, motivational and affective factors, developmental and social factors, individual differences. Bawat isa dyan, mayroong kasama or mayroong under sa kanila na mga principles. Yung kanina, yung letter A, 6 na principles. Letter B, meron siyang 3. Letter C, mayroon siyang 2. Then letter D, mayroong 3 ulit. As I have said earlier, it's up to you now how you organize this in your notes. No? Total, nandito naman sila sa module. Balikan nyo na lang yung part na yun ng module where they are listed under specific categories. I assume that you are downloading this module class, no? So that you can view them again, you can watch them again, even if you are offline. Kahit offline kayo, kahit wala kayong load, hindi kayo makapag-internet, hindi makapag-YouTube, online nga, you can still watch these videos. Di marireview mo siya, you can write your own notes. Ewan ko lang kung gumagawa kayo ng sarili ng notes, gumagawa kayo ng mga sariling mga summaries ng mga bagay na ito. Sana gumagawa kayo. I hope you have lecture notes. I hope you have summaries. You have your own. You have your own notes nga, no? References for your own personal use. Kasi yung modules natin in PowerPoint form. Yun namang video ay video. Yun namang sa chat natin ay chat. Hindi ninyo yun personal na notes. So please make or write your own personal notes for your own personal reference. Yan. One din yan, class. Learning strategy which you can use to improve or enhance your own learning. See? Okay. So Alexander and Murphy gave us these 14 principles. And again. Please let me go back to that. Ang nagbigay sa atin ng 14 principles ay hindi si Alexander and Murphy. Ang nagbigay sa atin ay yung American Psychological Association. Anong ginawa ni Alexander and Murphy? As seen in this slide, sila ay nag-summarize. They summarized these 14 principles into 5 areas. Sir, anong kaibahan ito? What's the difference between this and the categories? Nakakatatapos lang natin yung 4 na categories. The difference is that this is a summary. Meaning, yung mga principles ay pinagsama-sama sa isa or sa isang broader concept. Kanina, group lang. Pero nandoon pa rin yung 14. Walang binago sa kanila, group lang. They were just divided into groups. They were put together. They were lumped together by categories. Pero nandoon pa rin silang 14 principles. Dito, pinagsama-sama yung magkakahawig-hawig. At dahil ito ay summary na lang, ay hindi na 14 ng ating makikita. Otherwise, hindi ito summary kung 14 pa rin. So what we will see here are the 5 areas into which the 14 principles were summarized. The 14 principles, the 5 areas into which the 14 principles were distilled or synthesized. Number 1 is the knowledge base. Number 2 is the strategic processing and control, motivation and affect, development and individual differences, situation or context. Ito yung summary ng 14 principles. So, yung 14 ay itong 5 din na ito. Sinamarize lang. Yeah. Okay, so dahil summary, balikan na lang natin. No? One's knowledge serves as the foundation of all future learning. Kaya nga very important. That is the reason why it's very important for us to connect new lesson with the old knowledge, with previous experiences or prior experiences, prior learning. Because those prior learning, prior experiences are the foundation of all future learning. Sir, paano kung new lesson? Wala talaga kung ma-connect ka sa kanya, sir, kasi talagang new lesson. If that is the case, then new lesson talaga, wala ka talagang magawa. Establish that as the foundation, meaning as much as possible, give them as much information as possible so that they can create a base. Yan ang kanilang pinaka-base. So, dapat dyan sila maraming mga information na bibigay ang teacher. Dapat dyan mahabang discussion, maraming examples, and they should really get the concept. They should really understand the concept because that will serve as the foundation of future things they will learn and study about this topic, about this lesson. Yan. Concept formation. They are just starting to form this concept in their mind. So dapat yan, isang damakmak ang information, isang damakmak ang mga examples, mahaba ang explanation, mahaba ang discussion, until they form this concept in this mind. This concept will serve as the foundation of future learning, knowledge base. Then strategic processing and control. This refers now to the way the learner processes information. What techniques does he use to enhance his own learning? So mayroon siyang mga strategies, may mga techniques siya na gagamitin. Yung kanyang mga metacognitive skills will come into play in this part. Then we have development and individual differences. I have already emphasized the importance of providing varied, different learning activities and experiences to the learners because they have different personalities, they have different interests, they have different needs, they have different abilities. So, dapat iba-iba ang ginagawa. Yeah. Individual differences. The activity should be appropriate to their developmental level na magkakaiba-iba din. Yeah. Sorry. Nakita lang yung end. Huwag masyadong excited. Na daw, nalipat si Sir. Lumampas ko, not press. Situation or context. Context. Learning happens in the context of a society as well as within an individual. Napapasok dito yung kay Vygotsky, his social constructivist theory and the effect or influence of the society and the environment on learning, which we have already discussed. Okay, yan yung hinihintay ninyo. So once again, my dear students, we have come to the end of the road. And na-discuss natin yung pinaka-summary, pinaka-synthesis of the theories, the principles that we have discussed in this subject. Kaya nga natin ito inilagay sa pinakahulihan ng ating mga lessons. I hope that you have learned something from this lesson, from this lecture video. Please learn these principles by heart. The moment you start to teach, when you become teachers, these are the principles that serve as your guide to become effective teachers. These principles will help you, will guide you to, or in preparing, in designing instructional strategies, in preparing learning activities or learning experiences for your learners, in which they will be inspired to learn. They will be inspired to attend your class, go to your classroom, participate in the activities that you initiate. Kasi na yung mga ginagawa mo, nakaka-relate sila, nagigets nila, dahil nga tugma, swak na swak sa kanilang developmental level, sa kanilang interests, sa kanilang needs. No? In other words, to their nature as learners. They will find your classroom and your teaching fun. They will learn and they will remember you as when they graduate, when they become professionals, when they are no longer your pupils. They will remember you as one of the best, if not the best, teacher that they ever had. Ultimately, that is the goal of every teacher. Yung maalala sila ng kanilang mga pupils dati, mga estudyante dati, na sila ay naging mabuting guro para sa kanila, para sa mga learners. Knowing and understanding, having these principles in our heart, will help us achieve that goal as a teacher. Okay? So, again, goodbye to everybody. This is just for now. I hope that you have learned in this video. I hope that when you teach, you will remember these principles again. Sabi ko kanina, learn these principles by heart. Makakatulong po yan sa inyo, sa ating lahat, no? as teachers. So once again, ingat po tayong lahat. No? Let us all be safe. God bless everyone.